All right, good morning, second grade students. Today for language arts, we are going to be looking at choose the picture that matches the setting or character. All right, so first off, we need to know the main parts of a story. Now, the 5 main parts that make up a story are characters, setting, plot, conflict, and theme. So if you don't have these 5 main parts, your story is not going to be very interesting to either read or to have other people read. All right, so first up, we are going to be talking about characters in the story. So depending on the nature of the story, characters are most often people or animals. And writers use characters to perform the actions and speak the dialogue of a story. And the characters are what move a story's plot forward. So they are the who of a story. And again, characters can be real, they can be animated, again, they can be people, they can be animals. So some examples I had here were Mike Wazowski from Monsters, Inc., Woody from the Toy Story movies, which we know that those are animated and they are made up characters. And then in the bottom corner, I also have Anne Frank. And when you're older, you'll probably read The Diary of Anne Frank, which is a true story of Anne Frank. So she is a real person. So again, characters can be real, or they can be made up, and they can be people or animals, or they could even be other objects. All right, next up we have the setting. So a story setting refers not only to the physical location, but also the time the action takes place. So the setting is the where and the when of a story. So the setting could be outside. So it could be outside in the woods, outside in a park. It could be outside when it's light out. It could be outside when it's dark out. It could be inside of a house. So again, setting is time and place. So you could say we were in the woods at 9 a.m. and it was bright out. Or we could say we were in the woods at 10 p.m. and it was dark out. So setting will always have the time and the time and the place that the action is at. Next up is the plot. Now, the plot relates to the events that happen in a story. So the plot is the what of the story. So the plot usually begins with a problem and ends in the story's resolution. So most stories, at least most interesting stories, will always have some sort of problem, some sort of conflict that kind of starts kind of at the beginning and it builds. And then by the end, we know how it ends and there's a resolution to it. So in the picture here that I have, they use some bigger words on here. So we'll kind of explain it. So first we have exposition. So this is the beginning of the story. This is where you start to learn the characters, where the story is taking place, and you start to find out what the problem is or the main idea of the story. This is kind of the same for movies too. So this doesn't just go for books. So this is kind of how movies are too. So then after that, we start to have a rising action. So that's where we start to see, we already know what the problem is, but now we're starting to see how they're trying to figure out this problem, and it builds and builds and builds until we get to what is called the climax. And the climax is where now they figure out the problem, the conflict that's going on, and they get it figured out. And so now we know the answer to it. And then we start to go back down to the falling action, so opposite the rising action. And with the falling action, then everything starts to get kind of worked out and situated. And then the resolution is the end of the movie or the book, where we now know the answer and everything is great. All right, next up we're going to be talking about conflict. And now conflict is very important to make or break a good book or movie. So every story worth reading requires conflict. Now, this conflict can be thought of as a challenge or problem that drives the action of the story. So basically, if there's no conflict, there really is no story. So setting up a series of cause and effect events, conflict gives these events their why. So again, conflicts are going to be where, like in this picture, you have one side that says yes to something and the other side says no. So in a way, it's like a game of tug of war, kind of like in this top picture. So one side wants one thing, the other side wants another thing, and now there is conflict and it has to be figured out how they are going to solve this problem. All right, next up is theme. So the theme is a little bit more abstract than the previous elements that we have been talking about, but the theme is very, very important. So the theme refers to the underlying insight, which basically means the moral or the idea that the writer is expressing through the story. And there are lots of different themes that you could have in literature. And the theme is often thought of as the message of the story. So you could have a theme about judgment or on how to survive or peace and war. You could have a theme on love, on heroism, so like being that hero that comes and saves the day. You could have a theme of the difference between good and evil, the theme of the circle of life, so all of us are born, we're all kids, we grow up, we become teenagers, we start to become older, and then we become parents and grandparents, and eventually we all will die. And so that's kind of the circle of life. So that can be a theme. Another theme could be on suffering or even like deception and coming of age. So when you start to grow up and become an adult. All right, and that is our lesson for today.